So my name is Courtney. I'm going to be doing my presentation on the Blood Gang. So here it is. The Bloods are one of the most violent and notorious crime groups that are based in the United States. They started out as the Peru Street Gang, and it was started by Owens and Scott to form a gang to act as a protection against the Crips. They were the original Blood Gang, and the members would refer to each other as Blood. It's a common phrase in society, and it's still prevalent. The name Bloods was adopted by this group, and then the color. They were influenced and founded by other groups in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. The Bloods are traditionally comprised of African American individuals, but also include Hispanic, Caucasian, Asian members. The member base is somewhere around a minimum of 15,000 members. There is like no actual total anywhere, just because of so many subsets of the actual group. Within the Blood organization, there are smaller subsets that range across the country in different levels. So, due to the large size and popularity of the Bloods, they are part of various alliances. They're part of the People Nation, which is a street alliance that includes the Latin Kings, the Vice Lord Nation, the Black Peastone Nation. They appear to be a really large umbrella organization, and they have different rules, codes, alliances, rivals. But with that being said, like what's true for one group of Bloods might not be true for another. So you kind of have to understand the gang's like culture and symbols to kind of understand what their structure is, their groups, their history, their scope, like all of that. Because like what a Blood in California might do could be totally different than what a Blood in Pennsylvania could do. They've been largely popularized in today's culture, having many big name celebrities, in the mass media, in pop culture, in movie, like literally everything. I can personally say, like, I've known about the Blood since I was a little kid. And they're growing to be one of the most notorious gangs in the United States, and their reach could slowly, make it across the country. So, like I said, they're notably one of the most popular organizations in the United States and maybe the world. I don't know if that's a stretch, but they have subsets and they're known for being highly violent, directly representing their moniker. Due to their heavy presence across the country, it's hard to determine what members are in it for protection, who wants it for the status, who's just in it because they like what the organization represents. As for like their criminal activity, they've been involved in human trafficking, prostitution, drug sales, murder related charges. Some of these activities are a source of revenue for the gang. Trafficking is a source of revenue for some gangs. The victims, usually women and children, are forced, coerced, led into prostitution and forced into labor. Prostitution is also a major source of income for many of the gangs. They operate as pimps and they lure and force at risk young females into prostitution, and they control them through violence and psychological abuse. It's also been reported that many of the Blood subsets have had an active participation in dealing drugs throughout their territories. The illegal activities subsequently tie them directly to gun violence and gun related criminal activity. Google Bloods and Blood Gang, and the most notable headlines and most relatable that you'll see is like the capture that of Blood Gang leader sentenced to jail for homicide, Blood Gang leader in jail for murder charges. But since I said there are so many sets of Bloods across the country, it's nearly impossible to assess which organizations partake in what variants of illegal activity. Some might just strictly sell drugs. Others might participate in the trafficking. There's really no way in knowing who does what, but all of the subsets still represent the moniker, the colors, the signs. But some do have high levels of community activism and they want to keep their youth out of trouble. Not every Blood organization is as dangerous or illegal as the next, and I think that should be noted. While I'm not saying that they're necessarily like community outreach groups, they're not all bad. They date back to the 1970s, and the genesis of them was centered around the opposition of a rival gang, most obviously known as the Crips. Some scholars believe that the Bloods were originally founded as a confederation of smaller gangs who were all in opposition to the larger and domineering gangs in the area, and that included the Brims, the Bounty Hunters, the Denver Lanes, Athens Park Gang, Bishops, and others. The Bloods are distinguished by their color, and they adopted it in opposition to the Crips Blue. But gang membership was often forced upon some young men in effort to make the organization larger. The main motivating factor behind the Bloods would be to be better than the competition, more specifically the Crips. The move to form the Bloods came shortly after a concert when 20 Crips attacked and robbed Robert Bayou Jr. He was beaten to death after he refused to give up his leather jacket. Shortly after that, Frederick, and he went by Little Country, was murdered by a West Side Crip. So at this point, non-Crip gang members had formed their own gangs, and this marked the first Crips murder against another gang member and motivated non-Crip street gangs to align with each other, and it would be the formation of the Bloods. So due to widespread popularity of the Bloods, there's not one direct operating area for them, but they most notably have the heavy presence in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. In the 1980s, they also had a heavy presence in California that had to do with the crack epidemic. When crack became popular, the Crips and Bloods took things one step further, and they sent gang members out into the cities to ply their trade, and as a result, they used crack to spread their influence and the drugs to cities across the United States. And that had to do with the spreading of their territories and their locations across the United States. So, like I previously said, there are over 100 subgroups, and it's impossible to name all of the leaders and the members. And obviously, anonymity plays a huge part in it. But Sylvester Scott and Vincent Owens were the founding members of the Blood Gang in 1972. Like I said, there are over 15,000 active Blood Gang members. And they recruit heavily from the African American youth population in impoverished areas. However, gang membership from Caucasians and other ethnicities from financially stable environment is not uncommon. The factors that influence their membership are similar to other gangs, which include joining for protection, status, sense of belonging, economics, peer pressure, all of that. Most blood sets require a lifelong commitment, and it's known as blood in, blood out, meaning to join the gang and to leave, a member has to shed blood. So there are various sets across the United States, and they all vary in organizational systems, some as organized as the mafia, others just like cliques, but they typically use an organizational system that is similar to paramilitary groups, and the ranking, goes through with, the highest to the lowest, one of the most popular being the 9 Trey Gangsters, and the highest you can be is a Godfather, and then a big 020, a low 020, a 5-star general, 4-star general, 3-star general, 2-star general, and a 1-star general being the lowest, and you can work your way through. Gang sets may use additional structures, including ranks of ministers, captains, lieutenants, and the head of the set's typically known as the OG or the Godfather. And the set leader may be in contact with other set leaders, but the lower level soldiers have no knowledge of other sets, the activities, their leadership, how they're ranked, anything like that. So in the past years, the Blood Gang was known for their low-level dealings that involved drugs, weapons, prostitutions, and even though they were a widespread organization, there was no overarching connectedness between all of the sets. So different sets operated differently, did what they wanted, with really no interconnectedness between them. And like I'd mentioned, they had a heavy presence in the crack epidemic, but they also had their hand in other dealings like marijuana, cocaine, heroin. But today, some of them are becoming more organized, and they are operating within the realm of white collar crime, and that being, identity theft, mortgage fraud, counterfeiting, bank fraud, all of those. And they're really finding an interest in it because it's far less risky for some of them, because it's harder for them to leave a footprint. But currently, there are no known heads of the white-collar crimes and operations. They tend to stay fairly anonymous when it comes to who their members and leaders are. It's just safer that way. And while there are no elite criminals within the Blood Gang, there are many well-known members, especially those who are infamous for being rappers in today's culture. And actually, like, it's stirring up quite the controversy right now, as a rapper who identifies as a Blood is naming a lot of names of celebrities and other just regular members for being a part of the organization. So, when you think of the Bloods, I'm sure one of the first things that comes to mind is, the violence. And they definitely do take a large part in that. Part of their initiation is obviously to shoot a police officer, and that within itself is problematic. So, there's a lot about the Bloods, and I could go on for days, but I feel like, that probably most accurately represents them.